If you ever wondered whether your vote still matters, this conversation is for you. We speak to civil society leaders who believe that rebuilding trust begins long before the election day.
As well as Gauteng, we've seen murders of potential candidates who are going to be contesting the space for local government, and so unfortunately it continues to be a pain point that we have to start to think about, both in terms of the ability of people to be a part of the election as voters, but also the potential for those who are candidates to be able to contest. And of course the registration weekend has actually also happened, and so we're looking forward to see what the numbers look like. We were just talking prior to the recording that actually the voting districts were quite empty, at least relative to previous elections. Right. And so we're concerned about the potential for the number of people that we want to participate to actually be engaged in that space.
We can talk about the attributes of the turnout. We can talk about the attributes of pre-Mhlongo Commission and the political killings and so forth. But we are in the space where people need to go out and vote. If you need change, you need to go and vote. Yeah. Now, let's talk about the attributes, Kiara. I mean, the short numbers, the lowest numbers I've seen, I think I saw 2 people the entire weekend. Sure. And that for me was shocking. I understand there's a digital side and digital tools, but it was a bit daunting to see that turnout.
Yes, and one hopes that we aren't looking like what we're seeing in other democracies around the world, which is that you sort of start to get a drop-off of voter attendance, right, and not just registering, but even rocking up to the polls. And then that just sort of goes into free fall, where less and less people decide to engage in a democratic voting process. I think it raises probably a difficult but important questions for people who believe in an open democracy. Why do we see this kind of apathy? And more importantly, really what it speaks to is why don't people trust that politicians will bring the change they want? Because exactly as you said, you know, if we want to see change, we must go to the polls. But there is a sense, I think, that people don't trust politicians and they don't trust political parties in the way that they did in 1994. Yeah.
Those are quite, and these attributes they keep on, the unemployment. People are fatigued of voting, and they've been the language of IEC. They'll be like, okay, all right, once again. But here we are, Brian. Let's look into the responsibility as a citizen of going out and saying, I'm going to cast a vote. These together with the current political landscape, how is it looking, especially in our province of KZN?
KZN, as you know, we're a special child of the elections, in the sense that when we get tired of political parties and political leadership, there's a greater likelihood of us changing our leadership, especially at a provincial level. We saw in the early to mid 2000s, we were led largely by an IFP government, and then of course they got into a coalition with the ANC around 2004, and so we saw that even at post that point, once the Zuma moment came up in the ANC, where the African National Congress was able to take hold of the provincial government here in KZN. I think we're the second largest as a KZN province, most populous province in terms of the electoral count. So what we vote for and decide to move, the whole country feels it, and so it's quite important then to think about what our prospects look like electorally going forward. The interesting thing about local government, and when you talk about people's apathy, is I think we need to flip it a bit on its head. Unfortunately, political parties, candidates, the people who are contesting electorally don't recognize the potential for creating a more vibrant environment for local government elections more specifically.
Okay.
There's too much of a focus on your national and provincial elections and not as sufficient focus on local government elections. The reason why I think it needs to be more vibrant is because not only is local government more closer to citizens, but just the ways in which people look at local leadership. When you cast your ballot for a local government, it's not the same as casting a ballot for a provincial or national leader. You're most likely to know the person that you're casting your vote for at a local government level when it comes to your ward ballot. So, and I say most likely because I know most communities say we don't even know our councillor. And so that's the problem. But I think the interest of trying to create a more vibrant space means that we need to think about how do we encourage sort of a politics around joy, making people come together as communities and building a sense of camaraderie beyond the party political space. And so that's a missed opportunity, I think, from the political party space. Yeah.
And also with while we're still on the topic on apathy, my closest worry and my closest perceptive is on the youth. People that are needing to be the next generation, needing to be the next leaders, they're not available, they're not there. What is going on there? Are we still going to call it apathy, really?
It's not just apathy. There are elements of it which are apathy, but apathy born out of a recognition that the system is not responsive to our needs. It's saying we've seen our parents try, we've seen our gogos and umkhulu try, but nothing seems to be changing for them, and ultimately nothing has impacted my life any significantly differently. More often than not, they ask umkhulu wami to retire, they ask my mother to retire from work once it reaches a certain age, but in the political space they are still hiring each other post 70, and so all of the incentives for me to participate don't seem to be as visible. Young people are engaged, they are informed, they just also know that politics doesn't necessarily serve their interests as much as it ought to. And so if we're going to encourage young people particularly to be more engaged in the space, we need to make politics, politics is interested in them, but also interesting to them by making sure that there are also candidates who are vying for these elections. At the moment, I think we have a few political parties who have youth wings, but what's the perception of youth wings, and I dislike youth wings significantly because it says there's an adults table and there's a kiddies table. You as a young person, until you reach 35, you must stay at the kiddies table, and we'll concern ourselves with the governing of the party and the governing of the country. And so that's, I think, a real challenge for ensuring that young people invest in the system, but that the system also invests in them in terms of their own leadership potential. Parties who don't have youth wings but have a good trajectory for youth development themselves might also find challenges. Yes, you elevate young people significantly, but at the same time you seem to discard young people at a higher rate than you do some of your elder politicians, and we don't want to name some political parties, but there are some political parties who do really well at recruiting young talent. They sort of work in the sort of McKinsey and Bain fashion, where if you're an A student, you're quickly brought into the system, but you end up having to photocopy and bring coffee to the adults in the room. So there's that sense of things where you're not really elevated to the meaningful infrastructure leadership of that party that you ought to.
It's true. And Kiara, you have something to say there?
Yes, I wanted to add to that because, trying to understand voter apathy is important, but I would encourage us not to go and look for the problem in the people who aren't voting, if that makes sense. This is not where the issue lies. The reason for voter apathy is we have to hold the politicians accountable. So when you see gross negligence or corruption, self-interest, party politics above all else, right? That significantly breaks your trust in the ability for politicians to actually do something that will make your material experience one of dignity. So, you know, I hear this often, and other countries do it too. It's like, how do we activate the youth? I'm like, no, don't worry about that. How do you make the politicians do their jobs? This is what creates voter apathy, and they should be held account to that. You know, not only do they have very real negative impact on people's lives, they actually erode democracy by continuing to not deliver, but to get wealthier themselves.
And you are spot on right there, Kiara. The challenges on participation, they're not just starting with people not wanting to go, but there's a sword, there's something behind that literally has made people say, I'd rather not go. But then let's talk to a person who's saying that today, Kiara, and saying, I'd rather not go, or I'd rather just spoil my vote. Because that has happened. You'll hear laws. I mean, literally these days, people are saying, we'd rather not vote because of what is happening in our country, the immigration, the this and this. You know, people will always create a cause of concern. But does it really assist anyone to just not at all vote?
If you're not at the table, the decisions will end up happening without you. Whatever decisions are taken, especially in your absence, will affect you directly, regardless of whether you're part of that space or not. What we're saying is add your voice into the mix at least, and then of course the important work happens after the election has itself happened. Kiara talks about holding politicians accountable, and one of the ways in which we think about the electoral moment at the moment, the current most metros are forecasted to have to be under sort of coalition government after the elections. So on the one hand, we're saying go out and vote, but we know at the end of the day, to some extent, the people that you trust to negotiate about who's going to be in governance meaningfully at the executive level in most municipalities, we're going to say make sure that you send someone who you trust is going to actually speak on your behalf and represent your interests in that space. Otherwise, you're going to leave political parties to make decisions that are about who gets access to which pot in local government in particular, who decides which tender goes to whom, those sorts of decisions, who gets which position and therefore which perks, which ultimately doesn't filter down to the citizens where we require them to be. And so when you participate, you make sure that you're a part of that conversation. So if a decision happens in council and it doesn't necessarily speak to your interests, you have the opportunity and the obligation as a democratic citizen to be a part of that space and make sure that your voice is visible, is heard. And ultimately, if the processes don't allow your voice to be heard, then you have alternative mechanisms for participating in that space. Kiara's work, for instance, at Groundwork has introduced some interesting dynamics in terms of the collaboration between administration at a municipal level and civil society. I think quite often we see civil society as sort of people who have issues and they just go and argue, but they can be collaborators with municipal administration specifically to make people's livelihoods in the spaces in which they inhabit much more meaningful, much more dignified. And so it's important to think about how do we partner at a local government space to ensure that citizens' voices are heard beyond what is legislated for. We know that ward councillors ought to be holding quarterly meetings in their communities. They're not doing that at the moment. How do we hold them accountable? We know that there's Operation Sukuma Sake. War rooms are meant to be convened with department heads and department from a provincial government, but they're not doing that as actively. How do we make sure that we spotlight that and we make sure that people who are meant to be administrating that at a sort of municipal level understand that work, understand its value and ultimately its impact on the ways in which people engage and are willing to be led in a city. I think Kiara,
Kiara, really unpack for us, give us the lowdown. How does it work? The civic organization working with governance to ensure that the administration, the corruption, and all these small, they're not small, all these impacts actually are outdone actually? Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a big question, and I don't think that there's one way to do this. We've arrived at quite a sad time, I think, in our country, where we have not seen the freedoms promised after 1994, and the anger is understandable. What is concerning is that over the last few years, we've seen the kind of closing down of democratic debate, actually, and discussion, collaboration, which would, come after being able to have such a dialogue, to find at least some shared values. You don't have to agree with everything, but enough to move forward on a certain issue, especially around delivering or implementation. So we have great policies, and then they kind of just stay there looking pretty on a shelf. You don't really get the implementation, which means people don't get to experience what those policies are meant to do. Civil society, I think, has been strong in pushing government to raise these concerns, but many of us came to the point where you feel like you still weren't getting the change you wanted. So was it possible for us to start to develop our own solutions and even start to implement some of them, but not necessarily in a way that excludes local government, because we do believe that local government is fundamental for people's well-being, and it must be strong and it must be functional. When you see the collapse of local government out of all the spheres of government, that is the most dangerous for people on the ground. So the way we've tried to do it is to work to bring government officials from relevant departments into those processes. Because actually what we need to build is, we need to remember what it means to participate and do something together. A lot of government officials are scared of participation now. They don't want to do it. They feel their personal lives will be threatened. Or someone's coming and shouting at me now about the water, but I'm here for the park, But I think to some extent I'm sympathetic, but local government needs to understand that people look at you as government.
And require that
you delivery. That's right. And the accountability. So standing up, which we hear all the time, well, sorry, comrades, that's not my department. That's provincial mandate. That's national mandate. Or you're speaking to a provincial person. That's municipal mandate. We don't care. We see everyone in government as having the mandate to implement the policies and uphold the constitution. Now you need to do it. And for us, I think the role of civil society is both being, as you say, on the outside of pushing, holding to account people in power, but we can also work with local government, and particularly in showing them that it is absolutely possible to do participatory planning. In fact, you have to do it, else you don't have a city that runs for the people.
It's run by you.
It's run for a few.
Kiara, help us. Your organization, what does it do?
Well, Groundwork is an environmental justice organization.
Nice.
So we focus on environmental justice issues, which is very much about people and social and economic justice, but then related to environmental issues. So we work around issues of energy, mining, waste, and health, and more recently around climate and how the severe weather events that are coming our way, we have to plan for together so that we don't lose lives.
Absolutely. Oh, that's beautiful. That is really commendable and awesome. Now, colleagues, South Africa is 32 years old into democracy. We can no longer run around the bush and say people do not know. People know. In fact, I believe after we encountered COVID-19, people were sitting together and they got to learn and understand certain things. Even my mother knows too much. Like, how do you know this, Mom? I had it. So we understand this, but here we are still talking about the civil rights and the civil justice and the civil development of natural South Africans. But who are we really holding accountable? I'm so happy with what you are saying, Kiara. We said previous week with MEC for Public Works, he said something that was very, for me, I was excited about it. I said, if more people could do this. He said they sat down at civic organization like Alta and so forth to unpack what they're bringing as government to see if they're able to get assistance outside. How much of that could really assist, especially where we are at the local level? I mean, Durban alone is made out of peri-rural areas. So you cannot tell me, because you don't know what's happening on that house, or you don't know what's happening in that street.
I think that's very important work that, you know, the problem is for too long we've seen government administrators, politicians at gatekeepers for these types of things. We as civil society have been forthcoming and saying, this is what we have, this is what we're willing to collaborate on and do. And too often we've had doors shut in our faces because there's a sense that for government that they must keep that space solely as theirs. It's their terrain, they determine who comes in or out, and so it's important, and I appreciate if MEC Martin Meyer is someone who is willing to have the conversation from their side, because to a large extent some of us have gotten tired of knocking on government's doors and saying, listen to us, we're not here to contest your space, we don't want your positions, we don't want to paint you out as a bad guy. We want to say to you, we understand that there are complexities in navigating the space of governance. We understand that the competencies between local and provincial sometimes get grey, that gets hazy. You don't know who to speak to, but at the same time, as Kiara says, we're tired of those explanations. We want to collaborate with you and figure out a practical way of working this out. And so if we both come to the table and we say, these are the constituencies that we represent, these are the voices that are not in the room that we'd like to bring into the room, how do we help you execute your mandate in a meaningful way? And of course, it's a quid pro quo. We understand that as gatekeepers, there are certain institutional sort of linkages that government is able to enable for civil society to access through that collaboration. But at the same time, they need to be more forthcoming with ensuring that that relationship is equitable, that we both understand that we have something meaningful to contribute in the space, that we're not just here to listen. Sometimes when government hosts the conferences and indabas, it becomes a sort of a tick box exercise for them. We listen to a speech from some administrator from government. Maybe it might be the DG, it might be someone who's senior, it might be the MM from the municipality, and probably at 11 a.m. When the mayor or when the premier was supposed to be there at 9 a.m. he turns up and he says, oh, I just have 20 minutes and I'm in and out, and he delivers his 20-minute speech and then it's out. You don't have a real sense of actually engaging meaningfully. So it's important that even the key role players are available for these conversations. Otherwise, we're going to be stuck at a bureaucratic sort of challenge where we're addressing mid-level managers who don't have the real ability to maneuver and move things over. And so not only will citizens become disengaged with local government, but they'll be concerned about even us as civil society who promise to help them move things, and then see us in meetings, see us in conferences, but see their communities not having any meaningful change. And they'll say, you guys are collaborators with the system, and so we don't trust you either. And so we as civil society, and as much as we've knocked and we're tired of knocking, if the opportunity comes up, we'll do it, but we'll do it on terms which are mutually beneficial, and which recognize that if the relationship between civil society and government doesn't work out, we're willing to go out back to our constituency and say, we tried, these were the challenges, and we'll be open and upfront about that. And so they mustn't think that we'll be quiet about the reasons for a lack of cohesion in that space.
No, that's that's very, very clear. Kiara, as we are just winding down to our conclusion, the misinformations, we spoke briefly about this with Utabi last time she was with us talking about youth voter education. The misinformations, especially on your social media, we still do have people that say, oh no, I'm not going to go and vote, but you know, you guys are going to vote. All those kind of, you imagine that, oh my goodness, does this person understand how voting itself takes place? If you can just give us a clarity on that briefly.
Yes, I'll try and be brief. Your social media, I mean, I won't speak too much on that, except to say that, well, South Africa, we are not alone, pretty much using social media, it turns out. So then, I guess in this case, where does the accountability lie? It does potentially lie with the voter, because we do need to question what we are seeing, where it's coming from, why we keep seeing this story about this politician and this story about another one. You know, really it does take a bit of critical thinking. You asked earlier, what would you say to someone who said, no, I'm not going to vote? Why? All right. And I would say, okay, fine. So you have decided to shape those elections. In fact, your non-vote will probably shape it more than voting. So it's not true that not voting means I'm not interested. Actually, you play a major role in the outcome of that election. If you look at what happens in America, such a low voter turnout. Oh, welcome Donald Trump.
Welcome Iran war, yeah.
Yeah, there you've got a president who acts, well, we won't go into that, but who acts as this says, no, people put me in here, I have the will of the people, but you don't, because over half of your people didn't vote for you. But those people who didn't vote, they actually shaped that election. So, you know, I think for someone here who's going, I'm not going to vote, you are being a political player. Rather use that in a way in which you try and stick to your own beliefs and principles and choose someone, even if they're not perfect. Make a choice. Don't make your non-choice be everyone's problem.
Well, I almost forgotten this one. The independent
candidates.
That one is exciting. I think it's going to be very interesting to see because of how people also now give the outlook. I mentioned this before. Before we had the thing that I'm not going to say who I'm voting for, but people now publicly will say, no, I'm voting for this because of 1, 2, and 3. So I'm taking that also translate into the independent voters are going to be given a space to actually go and campaign. Independent
sort of candidates as well as smaller parties are going to be quite important in this coming era of South African politics. As we spoke about earlier, coalitions are a major factor, and so ultimately even someone who got 1 seat in council could end up being your mayor, because that's the way the coalition discussions end up. And so it's important to think about quite clearly, if you're going to be casting a candidate for your ward ballot, do you trust that person to ultimately deliver on all of your basic needs as a community? If it means collaborating with other people in the community, discussing your vote openly, or at least discussing the requirements that should come with your vote. With my vote, I declare that I want water. I declare that I want potholes to be fixed, etc., etc. Make that about a more collaborative effort. And I think when you spoke about misinformation, platforms like yours are very important. Community media, but also independent media seems to be gaining a greater trust from citizens, and I think that's an important space that's going to be played going forward.
That's absolutely beautiful and wonderful. As we conclude, any advice, a voice that you'd like to leave for people of South Africa ahead of the local government? I am excited about these elections, but I'm also a bit nervous
about
them as well.
No, your nerves are not unwarranted. As Kiara said, I think the main thing is not all information is good information. Make sure that you have more than one source of information. Be critical about even the information that you comes from so-called mainstream media or legacy media. Just understand that ultimately, whether a party campaigns on one or two issues, those issues which they campaign for don't need to be the ones that you make your vote on. You can have issues that are different from the broader discourse and make very strategic decisions about how you cast your ballot. As I mentioned, in eThekwini, we're a metro, so we only have 2 ballots. In local municipalities, they have 3 ballots because they cast a vote for the ward candidate, the PR candidate, as well as the district ballot. And so you can be strategic. You don't have to vote for the same party in all 3 ballots. You don't have to vote for, so you can play around with these votes. Yeah,
that's very important. Yeah. I think we need to have that conversation on the next one. Well, thank you so much, Kiara. Any from your side?
Just to say thank you. I agree. It's so important that there's a platform such as this. Elections should be exciting. We should be proud that we have a democracy. But it does take responsibility. I think it is an election where people need to think very carefully around who they want in their local government. Exactly as Sphamandla has said, whoever is getting in has to be good at negotiating. It means that they need to be politically mature, let me put it that way, in the way they understand how best politics can work for people and not for self-interest. So if parties are campaigning around certain identities in which they say we only protect our people, and if you're not our people, we don't care, they're unlikely to make good candidates to get into government at the moment, because we are in a government of national unity and most likely will stay like that for quite a while.
It seems like we're packed there for quite some time. Well, thank you so much to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And to unpack this, I believe that we'll be having another discussion like this.
We look forward to it.
All right, absolutely. Well, to you, our African Echo family, thank you so much for tuning in. We will be back with another one. It is a busy season. We're looking ahead to political parties coming towards this and also giving us what they have. But don't be a stranger. Stay tuned. We will always be bringing you something new. Goodbye.